So obviously, XBRL is new, and in Europe in particular. So in the United States, the XBRL reporting has been there for what, 15 years now. In Europe, it's new. So that's the first type of questions. What is ESEF? What is XBRL? How does the XBRL thing work? We get all those basic questions. Then come the questions about the mandate itself. People are interested which financial report to tag. Is it only annual or also semi-annual? Also, which sections of the financial report to tag? Is it only the face financials? Is it some tables, some notes? What is it? How to approach that mandate? The third type of questions is the questions about the taxonomy used, whether we call it the ESEF taxonomy or the IFRS taxonomy, which are practically equivalent. That taxonomy, interestingly, is more than 5,000 elements. So it's not a small number. Therefore, the question is how you navigate that taxonomy. How do you find that best element that represents the line that you have in your financials? And it's not always straightforward. The element, for the balance sheet might not actually be in the balance sheet. It might be in some different section of the ESEF taxonomy, which makes it a bit more difficult to find. And you have to find the best element to get the tagging correct. Also, those elements have properties. They have balances, debits, credits, and people need to understand that and ask a lot of questions about that, about the signs that you have to apply to your elements. And finally, something that has been mentioned and is completely new. It's even more new than the XBRL itself. It's the anchoring. That's a concept that has been in the XBRL space for many years. Some were mentioned, but actually ESEF is the first, or ESMA is the first, regulator that put it into practice, that set up the rules, said how you anchor, when you need to anchor, and generally anchoring is a simple concept of linking your own element that is difficult to understand by users to an element that is already in the IFRS taxonomy that is well understood by users. It's a simple, concept in terms of just having the link between two elements. Yet the choice of the anchor is probably the most difficult thing. At least I think it's the most difficult thing about the ESEF mandate, because you have to go out of your comfort zone, find an element that you are not actually using, find it among those 5,000 elements, and decide that that's the closest one, the most connected one to the line that you are using in your financial. So that's the difficulty in anchoring. And obviously, thankfully, these questions they might seem difficult to issuers. They might seem difficult to people that are listening to our webinar now, but for us, we've been doing the XBRL for many years, so they are pretty straightforward, and we are happy to help answer those questions. And finally, there is the group of questions on validation and acceptance of filings, and Miłka has mentioned the KNF, for example, and their validation of the orange filings. And I think this is the only group on this list that I would advise issuers to get in touch with their local authorities about. We obviously do validate our filings. There are some validation engines that are freely available. We've built some of the validations ourselves, but yet the local authorities might have their own validations, might have their own rules on acceptance of filings. So in this case, I would advise the issuers to get in touch directly locally. However, I don't see any trouble, with us fulfilling those additional requirements, should there be any. But it's good to know directly from local authorities on this.
Thank you. Most companies, as we know, don't have the required level of experience in XBRL, because this is new in Europe, and many see this as another burden. That's often a word we hear. It's just another compliance regulation burden that we're going to have to be placed under to add to their already very busy year and workload. Why is the quality so important, Bartek?
Quality is something I could be talking for ages, but generally the most important thing that the issuers need to understand is that their XBRL filings, while filed, they will be out there. They will be used by everyone, by analysts, by investors, by their banks sometimes. So if they get that wrong, then that incorrect information will be there in the public space, most likely forever. If anything is forever, then that will stay there. And it might lead to some incorrect analysis, incorrect investment decisions. And my guess is that everyone wants to avoid that and not have those incorrections in relation to their filings. In addition, XBRL gives the issuers a chance to tell their story direct. So you decide which tag to use. You decide how to tell that to the user. There is no third party that will correct it or sometimes manipulate it wrongly. Your data will go out there directly and be consumed directly by users. And yes, I think, can we go to the next slides, Andrea? We can go back to that one. So I just wanted to show you a couple of errors that people make in XBRL. And why those errors are important. Again, if you make those errors, then your data will be misinterpreted in the financial world. And some of them might seem quite simple. A company is showing net financial expense, for example, yet they are using an element for finance costs. So their position is net, and they are suggesting that it is cost only. It will cause confusion. Should the number be negative, they will get a warning, obviously, but should they think that warning is acceptable, users will get confused because they will think that the company has actually turned the costs into incomes, and that will be confusing. The second example here is about the statement of changes in equity, when the column actually says retained earnings and other reserves. So the content of that column is retained earnings plus other reserves. And the filer has chosen an element retained earnings. So much less content of an element than the actual position. And a user will understand that these are the retained earnings of the company, while actually there are other reserves that might be a big number within that is not related to retained earnings, but something else. And again, the user will be confused when analyzing. I think we have two more on the next slide. We have one very common mistake, and that happens for ESEF much more than it happens for example, the SEC filings, where people just look at the face financials and don't bother to look into the notes and actually understand what the position means. The line is called intangible assets, and the element intangible assets other than goodwill has been used. But when you actually go into note 14, you look at it and you see that goodwill is included in that number. And actually for that company, it was about 80% of that position was goodwill. And yet the element used was other than goodwill. So it will mislead the users as to whether the company has goodwill and how much of it has. In the US, you would have tagged the note as well. And then when tagging the note, you probably would have noticed your mistake because you would have seen that goodwill is there. But the point is, for ESEF, you also have to understand the financials. Just looking at the face financials, sometimes the descriptions are not that perfect or not that explanatory. And you don't know what the actual line represents. You have to go deeper and then understand the tag. And the final example, which I think is the worst of all of them, is a piece of quite strange financials where the issuer actually put their income statement in two columns. One says before adjusting items, and then they show the adjusting items, and then they total it to what normally is the only column in the consolidated income statement. But that's their choice. That's allowed. That the IFRS standards do not disallow that. But you have to be careful how you tag it. And the tagging choice made was using the retrospective application axis and the restatement. And therefore, the tagging suggested or meant, not even suggested, actually physically meant that the filer had a restatement. And that those numbers on the left in the first column are before restatement, then you have a restatement, and then you have restated numbers. And the filer did not have any restatements that year. They did not go back to the prior year numbers, that did not restate them. Therefore, that information is very strongly misleading, and also just showing that the issuer or the service provider did not really have a clue how to use the IFRS / ESEF taxonomy, and how to cope with something that is unusual. That's where you need the expertise. That's where you need the experience of having seen all those types of reports, many times, and not getting surprised and not applying some tagging that technically works. There is actually no technical error on it. Technically, it works from the XBRL perspective, but logically, it just doesn't mean anything, or means the completely different thing than intended. So you want to avoid all those errors, that if you do file, then you actually give the correct information to the market.